Okay, so what are we going to do in our cast tonight? So we're going to look at something called the business cycle first, because I think it's really hard for you to understand economics, fiscal or monetary, if you don't understand the business cycle. Then we'll look at the Keynesian side, and I'm going to give you an example using the New Deal under FDR, and then we'll look at the supply side, and I'll give you an example using Ronald Reagan. Okay, so this is a little graph that I've used before on the business cycle. And what I want you to understand is this is basically how our economy works, okay? Our economy has ups and downs, okay? Or booms and busts, as we call it. We go through periods of expansion, like you see here. And periods of expansion mean things like people are buying things in large numbers, like especially big purchases like homes and cars and things like that. Businesses are growing. They're producing new products. Their business is doing well. Those are things that we see during expansion. Typically during expansion, unemployment is really low because businesses are hiring, etc. Okay. At some point, you hit some type of peak. Okay, and there might be some event that then causes a slowdown, okay, or what we call that a recession, okay? And a recession is just when we have multiple periods in the economy, or quarters, because we measure our economy by quarter, where things kind of start to slump, okay? The stock market goes down because of people start to be laid off, because people aren't buying as much now. People don't have as much money. Companies start to not produce as much products, and thus they don't need as many people to work for them. And the recession happens, okay? These are natural, okay? We get recessions frequently throughout American history. Now, of course, the last big recession was in 2008, and it really, there's some disagreement there, but really lasted until about 2012, and was often called the Great Recession because it was the worst recession in history. Now, some people will ask me, well, what's the difference between a recession and a depression? So we've had a few depressions. Well, really, I would argue two depressions in American history. And of course, the big one that you would know is the Great Depression in the 1930s. So really what I tell people, the difference between a recession and a depression is A, how long it lasts, and B, the unemployment rate, okay? So during a recession, typically you might get as high as 10% unemployment, okay? Whereas with the depression, your unemployment rate is, like if we're talking about the Great Depression, it was 25%, so 1 in 4 people. The Great Recession, the worst one in American history, started in 2008, lasted for 2 years, okay? Lasted for 4 years. The Great Depression lasted for well over a decade. And so really it's the amount of time that happened. So right now in the United States, what do you think? Are we in a period of recession, or are we in a period of expansion? Just type it in the box, recession or expansion. What do you think we're in? Anybody? So, yeah, okay. We are in a period of expansion right now, okay? And so, what does that mean? Okay, well, it means that unemployment's really low right now. People who want a job can usually find a job right now. People are buying cars, people are buying houses, things like that. And it's actually one of the strongest periods of economic growth in American history that's occurring right now, okay? Eventually, we will go into a recession, okay? But it's very, very hard to predict when that type of thing will happen, okay? And how long it will last, etc. But we basically have this up and down movement like you see here. And this is, like I said, what we call the business cycle. One other thing that I'll mention with this is the definition of unemployment. So when I talk about, there were a max 10% unemployed during the recession, or during the depression, 25% unemployed, our definition of unemployment really just is the people who are currently out of work and who are seeking a job, okay? If you're out of work and you're not interested in finding a job, then you don't meet the definition of unemployed. So I'll give you a good example. Say that you have a mother or a father, one of the two, that have made the decision to be a homemaker. They stay home, and a lot of times maybe they raise the children, okay, while their spouse works. That person would not be considered unemployed because they're not actively seeking a job. So you're only considered unemployed by the definition and by the government if you don't have a job currently and you are seeking work. Okay, that would be the only way that you would be unemployed. So during the Great Depression, 25% were unemployed and were actively seeking work. Okay, so really it comes down to two different views on economic policy, okay? And really it's how much should the government get involved in the economy, okay? Liberals use the theory of the English economist John Maynard Keynes. So when you see that, it's not Keynes, okay? It's Keynes, okay? To support their view on what we call Keynesian economics. Conservatives rely on what's called supply side theories developed by economist Arthur Laffer during the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Now, the other two things that you really should understand before I jump into this lecture is the difference between fiscal and monetary policy, okay? So when I talk about fiscal policy, what we're talking about is how the government chooses to spend its money. So the budgeting, okay? That's a big piece of what the government can control, okay? So I say like fiscal, remember financial, okay? Fiscal policy is how do we spend our financials or how do we use our financials. Whereas monetary policy, which is what I'll be looking at next week with you guys on Tuesday, monetary policy is how the government manages our money supply and our banking system, utilizing now the Federal Reserve, okay? So fiscal policy is all about the budgeting and spending. Monetary policy, and just think monetary equals money. Monetary policy is how the government manages the money supply, okay, and the banking system that we have in the United States, okay? So when we talk about fiscal or Keynesian, when we talk about Keynesian or supply side theory, what we're talking about is really fiscal policy, okay? So everything you're seeing tonight is all fiscal policy. You're not going to see any monetary policy tonight, and if you're struggling with monetary, that's fine. I'll be breaking that down on Tuesday for you. So let's dive in here and talk about Keynesian policy. So that's John Maynard Keynes that you're seeing there on the side of the screen. He's that English economist who really developed this theory, okay? So Keynesian addressed fiscal policy, okay, on spending and taxing, okay? And he really felt that in times when, going back to that business cycle, you're going into a recession or, worse yet, a depression, you need to utilize this theory named after him, okay? He really believed that if it was left to its own devices, the market will not necessarily operate at full capacity, okay? So if you've done anything with Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand yet, and the Wealth of Nations, he agrees some with Smith, but what he's saying here is, well, there's more to it, okay? Sometimes the government does have to get involved in the free market and give it a little push, okay, to help it along, okay? So what he says is not all persons will be employed and the value of the dollar may drop. Really, a lot of that depends on how people spend or save money. And when too many people save too much, companies will manufacture fewer products and unemployment will end up rising. So when people spend too much, their spending will cause a sustained increase in prices and a shortage of goods. And so what Keynes is saying here is these are three examples of things that happen when the economy is kind of left to its own devices and the government doesn't get involved. And he said we can make an even better economic system for countries if the government gets involved in a little bit of these things and tries to curb those things from happening. So how do we do that? So Keynes basically believed that the government should kind of create the right level of demand. So what does that mean? When demand is low, the government should put more money into the economy by reducing taxes and or increasing government spending. Okay, and the latter is the one that typically liberals follow when it comes to Keynesian policy, that increasing government spending. If demand is too high, the government should take money out of the economy by taxing more and spending less, okay? So what does that mean? Okay, so under Keynesian theory, what liberals will say is if we're getting ready to go into one of those recessions, if the economy is starting to slow down, what they're going to say is, well, people for some reason are not confident in the economy. You know, they're worried about not having the money to buy a house. They're worried about not having the money to buy a car. They're just not buying as much as they used to. So as the government, let's get involved and let's help people out. Okay, so how do you do that? Okay. The government's going to increase its spending, okay? So a lot of times the way that the government increases spending during these time periods is they produce like works projects, okay? So they decide to dump billions of dollars into building new roads or fixing bridges and things like that. And so what that means is, well, the government has just spent billions of dollars so that we can do these things. Now what's going to happen is these construction companies are going to have to hire people to help do this. Okay, so we're going to end up hiring everyday working Americans who are looking for work to then go and do those government projects. And as a result, those Americans now are going to have money in their pocket and they're going to spend that money. That's the idea with Keynesian policy, is that we're going to basically throw government spending, throw government money through all these projects at the people. And because the people will have more money, they will start to spend more. And as people spend, then corporations that make products will have to increase their workforce because more people will be buying their products, et cetera. Okay. So consider what happens when the government begins a public construction project, okay? Not only are the unemployed construction workers put to work, but the bricklayers, electricians, and plumbers are too. With that income, workers can afford to buy products and services from businesses whose income and demand for employees increase as well. So it's kind of like a little cycle, okay? The government throws money in, okay? And if I'm using this example, now we have an construction company that's building X, okay? Whatever, okay? Let's say they're just building a school. So we've got a construction company that's building a school, okay? The government's just given them all this money to build the school. So the construction company hires all these people from the community, bricklayers, electricians, plumbers, whatever, okay, to build the school, okay? And then once the school's built, the school has to hire teachers and custodians and cafeteria workers. All those people now are employed. So in that process, not only the people that built the school, but the people that are working in the school now have money in their pockets and now have jobs. So as a result of them having jobs that are bringing in income, they can now go out and buy that car that they've really been wanting to buy. Or they can go out and buy that new computer that they've really wanted to buy. Or the iPhones that are out of this world expensive now that they really wanted to buy. And so when they start buying products again, companies that make those products start getting money. And those companies have a high demand for their products because everybody's spending money now because they have the money again. And so what starts to happen? Those companies say, well, we need to increase the amount of what we're making, and thus we need to hire more people. So it's like a cycle. Now we're back to hiring people. So that's how Keynesian policy is supposed to work, is that the government's going to put money in, and it's going to cause an expansion in the economy, okay? That's the idea here. So the best example of Keynesian policy is the New Deal. FDR full-fledgedly adopted the theories of Keynes as he put the New Deal programs together to fight the Great Depression. So the federal government, what they did, utilizing Keynesian policy, hired unemployed persons in the United States, because unemployment was like 25%, to do a variety of government jobs. And so I'm going to give you 3 examples here. There are tons of examples I could give, and in a U.S. history class, you would look at way more of these. One was the Works Progress Administration, which built things like schools, roads, dams, and other projects. In fact, there in the bottom right-hand corner, this is actually the school that I teach in, okay? It was built during the Great Depression by the Works Progress Administration. So local men from the community that I live in were hired, who were unemployed, to go and to help build the school that I still teach in today and almost 100 years later. Another example was the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. They hired young men to build and improve state and national parks by doing things such as building trails in those parks, bridges in the parks, etc. And then another was the Federal Writers Project, which hired writers to, among other things, record the testimonies of former slaves who at this time were still alive, but very, very old, many in their 90s, and some even into their hundreds. And so the idea of the New Deal was we need to dump all this money in the economy. The government needs to spend all this money, and it will spur people in the economy to start moving again. So how does that actually work? Well, with the Great Depression, it worked out fairly well. But, okay, the New Deal is not what got us out of the Great Depression, okay? I'm actually going to throw this to you guys. Does anybody know what actually ended up getting us out of the Great Depression? Anybody know? Yeah, World War II, okay? So it ends up being all of the economic progress that comes from World War II that actually gets us out of the Great Depression, which really is still Keynesian theory. Okay, the government was spending billions and billions and billions of dollars getting us ready for war and getting the machinery of war built, etc. The workforce exploded as a result. So it's Keynesian policy that does get us out of the Great Depression, but it's not necessarily the New Deal as much as it is World War II. And of course, World War II really wasn't that voluntary either. So that's Keynesian policy. Anybody have any questions on Keynesian policy before I flip over to supply side? Okay, so let's talk about supply side theory. So this is the theory that's most often adopted by conservatives. So supply side theory is a theory that came about by Harvard economist Arthur Laffer, who was really a key advisor to Ronald Reagan during the 1980s, okay? And he's really the one who came to define supply-side economics. He is still alive today. In fact, President Trump awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom sometime in the last 3 years. And so fiscal conservatives believe that the government should leave as much money supply as possible with the people, letting supply and demand govern the market. Okay, sorry, I'm being distracted on my end here. And so what the idea here is the supply side is you and I, the consumers. Okay, and the idea is the government is saying we can't keep just spending all this money. Okay, give the money instead to the people and let the people spend it. So this approach is often known as laissez-faire. And if that's a term you don't know yet, it's a term you definitely need to add to your government vocabulary, which just is the French word for hands off, okay? And it means taxing less and leaving that money in the citizens' pockets. So the government says, look, we're not going to spend as much money on if we're using supply side theory, we're not going to spend as much money. And as a result, we don't need to tax as much. We're going to give that money back to the people. So we're not going to tax them. Or I should say we're not going to tax them as much. So the thought of supply side theory is because people will now have more money to spend because they're not paying as much in taxes, they will spend it. Okay, they're not going to save it. Okay, the spending that they do will increase the purchasing, jobs, and manufacturing. And the more people spend, the more states will then collect from sales tax. Okay, so the federal government will take greater amounts in income tax because more people will be employed and will earn higher salaries or both. Okay, so again, it's kind of like a cycle here. The idea is we're going to cut taxes. People are going to have that extra money. People are just going to go out and spend that extra money. As a result of them spending the money, the corporations are going to need to hire more people because they can keep up with demand. And, you know, it works out well for the government because the government's going to get more money because more people are going to be paying income tax. So the idea is that keeping taxes low provides an incentive for people to work more and earn more, knowing they'll be able to save more money. So now, I'm not really talking about tax policy in this lesson, but maybe you have already looked at tax policy in your AP Gov course. And the idea is that, conservatives often want to see taxes decreased, okay, because they feel like government is too big, okay, and liberals want to see taxes increased, but increased on the wealthy, okay, specifically so that they can carry out the social programs that they want to see expanded, okay. So that's the supply side. Now, I created a little drawing for you, and I typically use this with my students when I'm teaching supply side. So this is like the outside, okay? Imagine that the federal government here are like the clouds, okay? And the little raindrops coming down from the clouds are the effects of government tax cuts under supply side theory, okay? So the idea is that we're cutting these taxes, which is the raindrops you see falling, okay? So one of them I have labeled is corporations have no money, or excuse me, have more money because they can increase salary. That's the idea, because we also cut taxes on corporations. So corporations now have more money, so they can increase the salaries of the people that work for them. Another one, people have more money, so they can start spending it. Okay, so that's going to help the economy. And then another one, corporations have more money, so they can lower the prices of the goods they're selling. So this is the theory of supply side. Okay, oopsie. This is often the reality of what happened. Okay, so companies raise prices because they know people have more money. Okay, generally corporations are pretty greedy. Okay, and so if they know that the general public has more money, that's the whole idea of inflation. Okay, then they're going to raise the price of their product. Okay, corporations generally don't increase the salary or lower prices, and people tend to save that money and not actually spend the money. Okay, that they're getting because of tax cuts. The other piece here, and this is really key to supply side, in order for supply side economics to work, if the government's going to cut taxes, then it also has to cut its spending, okay? Well, the government doesn't typically like to cut its spending. And so if the government doesn't cut spending, you have taxes that are decreasing, so revenue that's decreasing, and then the actual spending that's increasing. So you get this big debt, this deficit, okay, as spending increases and revenue decreases. And so supply side theory can really only work if the government's going to lower both taxes and its spending at the same time, okay? And that's really key. So the Keynesian side, the liberal side, would say, no, the government needs to spend more money. And that may mean we need to increase taxes, because then we can put the money directly into projects in the economy that will definitely hire people. The supply side theory, the conservatives will say, heck no, the government needs to get its hands out of the people's pockets. Let the people decide how they want to spend their money. So as a result, cut their taxes and let them have a little bit more in their pocket. So I'll give you the example of supply side theory using Ronald Reagan. So Reagan put supply side economics into full effect in the 1980s by greatly slashing federal taxes, especially on the corporations and wealthy individuals. Now, why do conservatives want to cut taxes so much for wealthy in the corporations, okay? It's not because they hate poor people, okay? I don't want you to think that's not the reason that conservatives cut taxes on corporations and the wealthy much more than they do for the middle class and poor. It's because they see corporations and the wealthy as the people who really do control the economy. They're the ones who own the businesses and things like that. And so conservatives believe that if you give those people more money, they will reinvest it in the economy. You know, they'll produce more products, okay, or new products. They'll hire more people, etc. So that's why conservatives often cut taxes for the wealthy. So under Reagan, while taxes were cut, putting more money into the pockets of people, government spending increased greatly, especially on defense due to the Cold War. So we get a massive deficit that happened in the 1980s. Okay, it ends up leading to one of the worst recessions in American history. Not as bad as the 2008 Great Recession, but one of the worst prior to that. So supply side under Reagan is now often referred to as Reaganomics, with the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. It was also utilized under the presidency of George W. Bush in the early 2000s, about the time that many of you were probably being born. And George W. Bush did the same thing. He really slashed taxes, okay, for all Americans, but he did not cut government spending. So you also got a massive deficit, and many people blame the Great Recession on those policies as well, too. So that's the basic idea behind supply side and Keynesian. I want to hear from you guys. Do you have any questions on supply side or Keynesian? And more importantly, like, did that make sense? Do you feel like you really do understand Keynesian or supply side now? Or is there anything that I need to go back and really explain more in depth for? I'll give you a second here. Okay, well, I'm not hearing anything. So you've got the schedule up for next week, okay, on those streams. But the other thing I did want to tell you is the other night in one of my other streams, which some of you were in that as well, too, because I recognize some of the names here. I did ask, what were things that you're interested in? And so I just literally have been making the November calendar for AP Gov for tonight for Fiveable. And that will be going live on the Fiveable website. By Monday, it will be up. And we're adding sessions on the writing side of the AP Gov test. Specifically, we'll be looking at the Supreme Court comparison essay next month. And then we're actually going to have a session where you're going to be able to do some writing with. I'm actually going to be leading that one with me to practice that. And the other thing we're going to start to do is just a bi-weekly study session here the week after next, where we will be here and answering any questions that you have. If you've got an upcoming quiz or test, anything that you want us to stream on, we'll be covering that night for you. It's just going to be like a Q&A to help you out with what the things that you need. So, like I said, those things should be coming up by Monday. And if you have any other things that you're like, yeah, I really need you to stream on this, feel free to put it in the comment box. I'm more than happy to listen to those. So with that, guys, it's a little bit of a shorter one tonight, but I hope that it's helped. And have a great weekend. See you, everybody.